Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm here with my colleague Rob Wilton from the UK, one of our fantastic employees and a fellow Digiscoper. And Rob, unlike me, I usually use just the phone. Rob's actually skilled in the art of using cameras. So we're going to address some of the issues of Digiscoping more with the DSLR and mirrorless cameras. We're going to go over some of the processes, settings, and moreover, the question that we get the most is how do you physically attach, the camera to the spotting scope? We're going to cover all that today. So, welcome.
The most basic question, what is digiscoping?
Hello, Digiscoping. If you want me to take that one I
Yeah.
know. Excuse me.
Yeah, you've done a bit, yeah.
Yeah, Digiscoping, of course, comes from coupling of some form of digital imaging device behind the powerful magnification of a spotting scope. So we've got digital from digi, scoping from the scope, um, and it's a very unique style of photography that gets you very long focal lengths. That's the major advantage, probably.
Yeah, I mean that's basically it, isn't it? Really, that's in a nutshell the benefits. I mean, there are personally, I think there's numerous benefits. Portability being a very obvious one when you compare a spotting scope with a camera on the end of it to a traditional 500 or 600 mil telephoto lens. The size of the scope it's much smaller, much more compact, much lighter, and obviously
Yeah.
it's dual purpose. You're using the spotting scope for observation, and then you can use it, put the camera on, so you don't need to carry both equipment, which is becoming, I think, it's more and more you hear about people wanting to go compact and travel
Yeah.
light, and
Yeah.
carrying a huge lens and a scope. I've
Right.
done
And I
this.
mean, we see that, of course, on our own side of the business, just with the spotting scopes and the popularity now of the new small compact 55 in particular, but even the sort of mid-size 66, a lot of people moving down, saving pounds, shaving off pounds. And it does seem like the trend in the camera side, of course, is the same. But for folks that have, decent camera gear that's 4 or 5 years old, I mean, it's not uncommon to have, 12, 13 pounds in lens sometimes, on
Yeah,
a,
absolutely.
especially a really fast, telephoto. So yeah, there's that. Um, I think, of course, the other one is the incredible focal lengths, which we've talked about. And, it really can't be touched in normal means. With my phone, I'm capable of reaching potential focal lengths, up to 5,000 millimeter lens equivalents if we're looking at a 35 millimeter frame or a full frame camera, which is unheard of. And of course, that leads to not only the ability to reach out and touch a more distant subject, but there's also probably an ethical standpoint to that, being further away and getting a full frame image from further back. I feel definitely changes the behavior of the bird. When you're not having to stalk it and get up close, you can see the animal's aware of you. When you're
Yeah.
moving up closer and closer, and they are behaving differently. So there's that aspect, especially if you're shooting video, that helps a lot too. So that's one of my favorite things about Digiscoping for sure.
Yeah, yeah, it is a real big plus point. The other thing is, if you think about the cost as well, some of these telephoto lenses are huge money. The huge pieces of glass where this spotting scope is much more affordable, and say it's a dual purpose equipment. So yeah, I mean, it's obviously with the telephoto power, you've got to sort of respect that, and there's some sort of drawbacks and advantages, pros and cons. But we'll talk about that a bit later on.
Mhm.
But overall, and people often mention about the quality, but if you're using a good spotting scope and a good camera, the digiscoping, you'll be hard pushed to decipher whether it was with a huge DSLR lens or whether it was digiscoped. Some of the stuff that our ambassadors are producing it's unbelievable.
Yeah, yeah, just I mean, mind-boggling, really.
Camera types, I mean, we don't baffle go into way too much detail, but obviously these days DSLR, it's been around for many years now, digital single lens reflex. So that's a digital camera, and it's got the mirror inside. So you'll hear that mirror. The mirror comes down and goes back up. That's the shutter. And then obviously the mirrorless, which are more and more popular these days, taking over the market really. So there's no
Mhm.
mirror in there, and there's benefits. They're more compact. You don't get any shake with the mirror action.
Right,
I'm tending to use mirror for myself, using Sony full frame and Olympus Micro Four Thirds, so they're both mirrorless cameras.
right. And the autofocus is more contrast based, like a phone or the point and shoots, correct? Rather
Yeah.
than the old DSLRs. I don't know if they've changed it now in the modern DSLRs, but they were always light dependent autofocus. So once you got below f8, your autofocus stopped working, basically. Or I should say above in a numerical value, but below is from the standpoint of the physical size of the aperture. Once you get to a smaller circle of light coming in, they could no longer, the autofocus would no
Yes.
longer
Yeah.
work.
Yeah. Some of these mirrorless the autofocus is just so fast these days. I mean,
Mhm.
I've been digiscoping for many years, and with a whole museum of old cameras, and the autofocus was always one of the big things. I mean, well, not because it's a manual focus process, but yeah, the features these days, like the focus peaking, and
Yeah.
it's just it's a dream, really.
Yeah, I've been digiscoping long enough. My first experience was, this is before the phones got really good, was back to these old point and shoot cameras, and I remember that first one, those Nikon Coolpix swivel bodied. I
Yes.
can't remember the models. They were way back. I'm not going to do the math, but 2 decades plus.
Yeah.
You'd press the button and you'd go one, two, three, and then it'd go click, and you're real
Yeah.
lucky if you
Yeah.
got the bird was still in
Yeah.
in the spot where you when you press the button between that and when it actually physically took the picture.
Yeah.
So yeah, they've come a long way for that for sure.
That was the 4500, that one, and then I think there was a
Yep, yep, that's
9500. It was,
exactly right.
yeah, got that used to have those, but it was all with those. It was all about the fact that the lens was internal, so it wasn't an external lens that moved in and out. It was internal, wasn't it? So you could put it on the end
Right.
of the scope without any problems.
Yeah,
That's
work
why.
within that the eye relief there without without getting a lot of vignetting. That's what
Yeah,
made that
yeah.
the ultimate camera back in the day. But yep.
I kind of miss it in a way. That sort of it was good fun trying to
Yeah.
push these cameras to the limits. Types of digiscoping. Yeah, I think this is where we can go into a bit more detail now and probably help a lot of people out, I guess. So yeah, there's two distinct types, and the body only method is probably the most simple way of doing it. So you would have the adapter, which goes over the eyepiece. You don't have any kind of lens on the camera, it's just a body only. The body goes onto the adapter via a T2 mount, and that's all there is to it. So you can very quickly be set up. So for example, this picture here is our PA7A. So that slides over the eyepiece. You can see that you can still use the zoom lens. And then you just change the T2 ring specific to your camera system. So that picture there, for example, is a Sony. So there's a Sony SE mount T2 ring on there. If it was a Canon or a Nikon, you would just change that one part, and it's very simple to set up. I mean, that setup there with the objective 25 times magnification, you're looking at 1,000 mil as your minimum starting point there.
So yeah, big magnification without the lens, but you are losing that versatility, which we'll talk about in the following slides, of course. I'm not going to
Yeah,
jump ahead too
yeah.
much.
But the drawback with this method, and it's why some people tend to use the following method, is that it's very demanding on the camera sensor. This is because you've got no communication between camera and spotting scope, and you're using the spotting scope as a almost as a lens, and obviously it's not. The spotting scope isn't like an f4 or a f2.8 huge telephoto lens. So you're taking a hit on how much light is hitting that sensor. So you need a camera which can support the image quality with good ISO performance. So that's why it tends to suit the full frame cameras
Mm.
better because they can control the ISO. So if you don't have a fast shutter speed, you're going to get blurred shots. So you have to get those shutter speeds up by increasing the sensitivity of the sensor to light. So you do have to have good ISO performance. Otherwise, you're going to
Right.
get very grainy images. But for the most simple setup, that's the body only is the method there. And we've actually got on the next slide, we can show you a how simple it is. So you remove the accessory collar. The adapter has an inner collar, which then screws on onto the scope body. The eyepiece goes in, and then that's the T2 ring. That one's I think that's just yeah, micro four thirds T2 ring onto the adapter, straight into the body, and then you just push it on, and you are literally good to go at that point. Of course, if you want to change the orientation, that's no problem. If you want to shoot portrait, but so it's as simple as that, really. No optics. There's no communication. There's no lenses inside. It's just pure scope, camera body.
Right. And again, I think the part that people just have the most problem with T2, just so you know, is a standard photographic term. A T2 ring and a T2 mount is a standard in the photographic industry used on a lot of non-branded, like third-party lenses. Some of the old Sigma lenses and things would just have the standard T2 thread, which is a 42 millimeter male thread on the end. And then you would buy this T2 ring which would screw onto that thread and then have the bayonet mounts for your specific camera body. So when we're talking about a T2 ring, it's sort of an understood that that is, a known item within the photographic community. And it is a standard in the photographic community, that 42 millimeter fine thread um, that will be on the end of a lens or of various adapters. So,
Yeah. So basically, with our adapters, as long as you can buy a T2 ring for your camera, it's going to fit our
yep.
adapter. So it's very universal in that respect. And then we move on to using a camera lens, and you'll find that a lot of our ambassadors are still using their main tool as a mirrorless camera. They go down the micro four thirds route, which I also do myself, and it's a really nice system. And we have an adapter that allows you to connect to the micro four thirds, well, any system camera, with still has the lens on. So you get some nice benefits doing this, and you tend to use a pancake lens. Micro four thirds is very compact, so by adding the optical lens in front of the eyepiece in between the camera, you reduce that huge focal length in effect. So if I'm using a 25 mil lens, which is 40 mil on a micro four thirds, it's reducing the focal length down. We'll talk about sensor sizes on the next couple of slides, so that will make a bit more sense. But this method is giving you faster shutter speeds. You've got some communication between the camera and the lens, so you're going to get meter readings, so you can adjust the metering. You're going to even some within a certain tolerance, some autofocus helps with that. As long as the scope's within a certain tolerance, then the back focus on the camera will adjust, and you can adjust your exposure. So it's a great method. And it's like I said, it's particularly suits this micro four thirds compact size.
When we started this, going direct to the body was the way everyone was doing it. And then, it's important to understand that there's been a shift in the photographic equipment as well. Now the camera body and the lens communicate a lot, which didn't used to happen. Back when I started photography, that wasn't a thing. Both for metering and for autofocus and everything else. So by using this lens, it's become probably more important, and the reason it's probably preferred now is because you do get, most of the versatility of your camera body and a lot of the functionality that's in there works where it will not without the camera lens included. So this is, I think, more and more the preferred method. Would you not agree, Rob? Based on
Definitely,
yeah,
definitely, yeah.
seems like
All the ambassadors I know, the guys mainly using DSLRs, they're all on this method.
yeah.
So when you see these incredible shots on our social media and things, that's usually what they've been shooting with. Um, and there's also when you've got the camera with its own lens on there, there's some auto corrections going on inside of software and that kind of thing. It just produces a crisper image somehow.
Yeah, yeah, everything's the full functionality of the camera is in use when you have that kit lens attached. So this is, I think more and more the preferred method, although as Rob mentioned earlier, it's not quite as easy for mounting, and we're going to get into some of the nitty-gritty on that one because that's where it gets a bit more confusing, perhaps.
Yeah. Now, it's important to say that it only works with a prime fixed focus lens. You can't put a zoom on because obviously you've got a lens zooming in and out. And when it's on the end of an adapter, that's not going to work. So on the Micro Four Thirds, the typical go-to lens is a 20 mil prime or a 25 mil prime lens. If it's a full frame, then you're looking more towards a 50 mil.
Just to be get right the proper focal lengths. If
Yeah,
you have a 50 mil with the crop factors where that comes in on the Micro Four Thirds, all of a sudden you're finding you've got so much magnification to begin with. It's you don't have that low end to be able to get a bird in full frame even at times.
yeah,
So yeah, and I think it's I remember Simon Brumby in his deep dive to digiscoping, which is still on our archives on our YouTube page. Um, he was the first one to talk about that I heard talking about the lens difference, somewhere back when he was talking about this using the lens method. And this is sort of when it was just kind of coming around. But yeah, I remember he said like a 25 on a Micro Four Thirds, the APS-C, like a 35, and then the 50 mil was sort of the preferred size, roughly. It's
yeah,
not exactly there, but I mean, just understand that by reducing the focal length when you have greater crop factor where your camera is physically blowing up the image internally to reach a 35 millimeter frame from where it is. That's why the lower uh, millimeter, the smaller millimeter, the shorter focal length lenses come in play.
yeah. And also, I have tried with various lenses, and you need a lens which is quite compact, so not too deep. I have tried it with a 50 mil lens on full frame, which is quite a deep lens, and it's just positioning the camera too far back,
Mm.
so you can never get past the vignette, and you get a very small image in the circle. So that's why these pancake lenses are also extremely effective because they're just positioning the camera in an optimum place as
Yeah,
well.
and again, just to qualify for those that know pancake, they're called pancake lenses because front to back they're very, very shallow, right? So they might only be, a couple centimeters, or half an inch, whatever you want to say, in length, front to back.
Yeah.
So it allows a much more compact package hanging off the backside of the scope as we see here, which, in this case, unlike the PA7, which, we saw before, mounts to the thread rings on the body of the scope and is a little more secure. This one's hanging off the end of the eyepiece. So it's a little bit uh, better to obviously to have that shorter lens as well. It's more effective from a weight and balance standpoint as well, correct?
Yeah. So we've got another short video here, which, uh, yeah, nice and easy to explain. So the DA10, you've got an inner collar. That's the filter ring that you need to attach into the filter thread of your camera there. And we'll talk about that in detail in a second. So that goes straight into the filter thread of your camera lens. The eye relief cap comes off the eyepiece. And then you put the inner collar on, and then it just pushes on. You can see this is using a straight scope, which again, some of the very serious digiscopers mainly digiscope when they're out rather than observation are using a straight scope because it's more acting more like a lens.
Yeah, a little more intuitive if you look in the same direction. But the angled scopes work absolutely fine as well in
Yeah.
the same manner. Just to qualify that, um, they both will function in the same exact way. It's just that, the straight lens is easier to point in the direction on the fly. Um, and again, here's the exploded view, if you will. Um, Number one, we've got the eye relief, the eye cup, if you will, on the eyepiece has been removed and replaced with the inner ring of our DA10 adapter. And then number two shows the outer collar of the DA10. Number three is uh, where we get the most question. And let's go into the weeds a little bit talking about this. This is an adapter that goes from the threads on the DA10, and we do have in-house rings that we use. The most common one being it's listed here in the third section, our TSN AR42 GT ring. And what that does basically is that takes that thread down to the standard 42 millimeter, which I said again is that T2 ring. Um, but instead now of going into the camera body, you are having to adapt from the 42 millimeter there to whatever the filter thread ring is on the lens that you've selected. And that's going to be um, different depending on which lens. And you'd have to literally look at what is the filter thread ring. So the filter thread ring is built into the end of the lens so that you can add filters, a polarizing filter or a colored filter on the front end of the lens. And they'll all be a different millimeter rating. It'll be listed on the lens as to what size that is. Usually right inside that ring, it'll tell you in millimeters. But you'll have to use what we call step rings sometimes. If you don't have one of our rings to go directly to that, you're going to have to use a step up ring to go from this 42 millimeter into whatever the thread is on the outer end, there, the distal end, I guess, of your camera lens. So that's how that number three is the big mystery. So there could be a 3A if if you have to use a step up ring that will change, either increase or decrease the thread size depending on where you're at. So hopefully that makes sense. But what you're trying to do is get from that 42 millimeter T2 thread to the proper thread on the inside of your lens, excuse me, on the outer end, on the distal end.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you, that's the whole reason we sort of advise this is because, if you go down to that 42 mil, then the chances are you will be able to get a third party stepping ring for whatever size your lens is. If you try and go from different sizes, it gets more complicated. But so yeah, you want the female 42 mil, which goes onto our adapter into the male thread size of whatever your lens is, and then yeah, you're good to go.
And I think that, 52 is a common
Yeah,
thread size very often on, like, say, a 50 mil um, for a full frame camera, as an example. But
yeah,
it'll vary and it'll be listed on the lens once you get it.
yeah.
But I think couple things on lens that I would suggest. If you're just going to be using it for digiscoping, you may not care if you get the quickest lens. You may not have to spend for the most expensive lens with a very low f-stop because your true aperture is really dictated by the circle of light, the tiny circle of light coming out of the backside of the spotting scope. So you don't have to spend necessarily that extra money to get to an f1.8 lens if there's a cheaper lens that doesn't have the same aperture, if that makes sense. So you can save a little money there. More importantly, I think would be if there is an option for a pancake lens, which is going to have, be physically less um, bulky, in the system, that's going to net you a better result. So that may be where you want to prioritize when selecting your lens. Okay. But
Totally.
you don't have to necessarily get the quickest lens out there unless you're going to use it for other things as a prime lens as well.
Yeah, yeah. And usually, if it's a 25 or a 50 mil prime, it'll be the aperture. If it's f2.8, whatever, it'll be more than what you need.
Yep.
Um,
Exactly.
so yeah, so just a little bit about because we do get asked quite a lot about focal lengths and magnification and that kind of thing, and because obviously you're talking about a spotting scope. It wasn't invented. It's not a lens. It's not. traditional camera. It's you have to work it out differently. We can give you some sort of comparisons, um, but first of all, it all comes down to the camera system you're using. So if it's full frame APS-C or Micro Four Thirds, you're going to get a different focal length equivalent depending on what camera's on the end of the scope. So we've got some examples here. You can see that the subject there on the cliff was 38 meters distance. We laser measured that. And if I put if I use a full frame camera, this is at 25 times optical zoom on the scope. It's a 1 times crop factor. There's no cropping. So 1,000 mil is 1,000 mil. If I change to it, and we did do this. This is a genuine test. We sat there on this cliff face with all different camera systems. So all these pictures are genuine. They're not just zoomed in Photoshop. So APS-C is a 1.5 or sometimes 1.6 times crop factor. So you're getting 25 times optical, minimum 1,500 mil. And then with the Micro Four Thirds, it's a double crop factor. It's half the size of a full frame sensor. So you're starting. You can see why the people using Micro Four Thirds tend to go down that other route. If it's body only, then you are talking a minimum 2,000 millimeter starting point there. So that's a hell of a lot of power to control.
Yeah, yeah, and that's why, if you were using a larger lens, it'd be more challenging. And I'm going to back it up a little bit and just talk about crop factor for folks. Go in again because if you're not a photographer yet or just starting, that may not make sense. So we have to go back in time to the days of 35 millimeter film cameras. That was the standard for frame size, right, in the industry for a long time. And when digital came out, um, a lot of these sensors are much smaller in size than a 35 millimeter slide would be, if you're old enough to remember what that looks like. So what they would do is they would digitally enlarge, basically blow up that picture to fill that size frame, okay, a 35 millimeter frame. So the APS-C is about half the size, or excuse me, two-thirds the size, I guess, of a 35 millimeter film frame. So it gets increased by, 50% roughly on average. So your lens shoots the equivalent of a longer lens. And then the Micro Four Thirds, being very small sensor, is blown up 2 times to reach that. So that's what we're talking about. That's what's called crop factor. How many times the camera internally is going to blow that up to get to that standard picture size of a 35 millimeter film frame. And that's also why they're called full frame cameras, because the sensor is the same size as a piece of 35 millimeter frame, a film, excuse me, back in the day. So kind of going back, showing my age. But that's what crop factor is, and that's the effect of it. And that's why when you have a larger crop factor, you're getting the effect of a longer lens.
Understanding optical zoom and focal lengths. Yeah, again, it's all to do with crop factors. It's all to do with magnification of the eyepiece. It can get a little bit complicated, but once you know a few simple equations, it's not too bad to understand. So to multiply to give the magnification, you would tend to take the magnification of the spotting scope, times it by the focal length of the camera lens, then by the crop factor, and that's what gives you the effective magnification. So it's not so complicated. That it's easier to explain using the camera lens method because you can easily calculate. If it's body only, there's varying factors such as the position of the sensor. It can get quite complex to explain how we come to this 1,000 mil. It's not just a times this kind of thing. There's various things going on, like I say, the position of the back focus of the sensor and that kind of thing. So, but with the camera lens onto the eyepiece, it's just a case of multiplying those factors, and then you'll get the effective telephoto equivalent, and then you can do some other calculations to work out what the magnification is, and we've got some examples on the next slide for that.
And the good news is, if you don't care about the math, the only thing to remember is that a spotting scope has massive magnification, which is going to get you focal lengths greater than you can get in any other photographic system. Okay.
Exactly. Exactly.
But those that want to know, here you are.
Yeah.
Go to the math too. It's not a test. And, again, looking at the lens equivalent, this is the standard used in the industry, which again is what it would appear on a full frame digital, which was based originally on a 35 millimeter frame. So they kept that measuring system as far as, millimeter lenses. So when this transition happened between film into digital, it still made sense. But the crop factors was the wild card that changed that. But so that, I mean, that's a big lens, but remember that we've got the versatility now of a zoom eyepiece on the scope, which literally starts at 25 here, but it literally goes up to 60 power of magnification. So let's look at it with 60. If we were to crank that zoom, just literally spin the zoom eyepiece up to 60 power, you can see the game changes completely. Now it's a 60x times 20 millimeter lens times a two times crop factor, begets you 2400 millimeter lens. So, understanding that most people that are swinging wildlife lenses, from the hip at least, are maybe shooting with a 300 to 400 millimeter lens on average. This is 600% more magnification than that system provides, which means you can be six times further away or 600% further away from your subject and get the same size image in that frame. So that's the way to think about this. So great versatility and massive magnification, which comes with its own problems, which is a whole different issue as far as stability and things too.
Equipment, yeah. So just a brief, obviously from a Kowa perspective, um, we as Digiscoping goes, I don't think there's any other company that matches our sort of commitment into the Digiscoping product and what we do and how everything's cross-compatible and the options that we give. And of course, the promenade scopes. One thing with Digiscoping, we talk a lot about chromatic aberration, the color blur, the color fringing that you'll see, and you'll particularly see it in a digiscoped image. I mean, you can detect it with your eye, but it's a lot more apparent on digiscoping images. So if you really want top end results, then the fluorite crystal in our spotting scopes, which massively reduces chromatic aberration, is a real bonus for the digiscope. This is where you will get these professional DSLR quality images through a spotting scope. It's really controlling the color fringing.
Yeah, it's amazingly good. And you can look at all the independent reviews out there. The vast majority, I think, now are going to put us in the top two always. And I think that we take first place more often than we do second. That's not bragging. I mean, literally do the research yourself. Look at the independent reviews and you'll see the same. I remember 1990, I think it was. I was in the field, saw the first Prominar model Kowa, that the first one with fluoride. That it was a TSN4 model back then in the field, and it was mind-boggling because I'd never seen anything like it, and there hadn't been anything like it prior to that. So we've been doing this a long time. It's been our prowess, our expertise, and I think in the field we do have the reputation as the spotting scope company. Yeah, out there. We've been doing it longer than anyone else as far as the spotting scopes, and we've had this sort of level for approaching 50 years now of using these fluoride lenses very effectively in the field.
And of course, like a lens, the larger the objective, the more light gathering power, which what translates to faster shutter speeds, which is very important in wildlife photography. So if you're really going to get into DSLR or mirrorless digiscoping, then we would recommend going for a larger objective. But that, having said that, our smaller fluorite crystal scopes are excellent, and our ambassadors are loving the 55, and they're putting their micro four third cameras on the end of the 55 and getting incredible results. They kind of like that short as 17 times magnification, which the 55 gives. But for light gathering, then the 88, the 99 is probably the Digiscoper's go-to pieces of
Yeah.
equipment. And of course, the dual focus is very important as well because the depth of field which these incredible focal lengths that you achieve in digiscoping, the depth of field is narrow, so it really helps with our dual focus system that you can have fingertip control. You're not having to twist the barrel and upset, move the scope or affect the handling. If you can use your just fingertip control, you can really get that critical focus, which is very important.
Yeah, it's a huge advantage with that. As we've talked about this massive magnification. So we've kind of alluded to it a couple times, but I mean, I'm going to even kind of go off on tangents here as I do. Um, the massive magnification, as I've said, becomes problematic at times. You do have to have a very stable platform, a very stable base. Any sort of additional movement, and these helicoid style focus rings, I'm not picking on anyone, it's just the nature of the beast. You're impacting more body, when you twist that ring. So there's more surface area being affected, and, it's going to bounce even more than just, barely moving that fine focus wheel with a fingertip is a huge advantage. Um, and again, something we've alluded to, talking about the mirror in the DSLR. I think Rob, you probably mentioned it, but because of that mirror slap, you actually have to have a faster um,
Yeah.
equivalent shutter speed as well, because you actually do have this internal vibration
Yeah.
thing inside the camera body, and that's again another advantage of the mirrorless systems. All else being equal, at the same focal length, or excuse me, same shutter speed, the mirrorless doesn't have that internal mirror slap, as they call it, which will vibrate the system. So you can get away with slightly slower shutter speeds, perhaps with a mirrorless than you can with the DSLR. So that also becomes an advantage, which helps with the smaller objective lens sizes. And that's what we're talking about too. I think you mentioned that, but when we say 55, 66, 88, 99, that is literally the diameter of that outer lens, how wide that is. And that affects the size and the weight of the package that you're carrying, So our small compact 55 millimeter scope in the 55 series, um, weighs just over 2 pounds, which is, about a kilo probably, right? In
Yeah,
grams. And so not even quite. Um, and then the 66 millimeter is one of the full size, but I call it the mid size because it's the smallest of the three, the 99 millimeter, the 88, and the 66 millimeter. And it comes in at 3 pounds in um, with an eyepiece, which again, you can figure that out in grams. But half again, the weight of the 55, but still very compact, very lightweight. So they become very popular. Yes, you are giving up some light, but the correct solution for any individual is the one you're going to carry. If you can say, I'm not going to carry that larger scope as much, then, you just accept the limitations of that system and use the scope you have, obviously, that be it the 55 and 66, if that's the one you're going to take to the field. It's not worth spending the money, unless, of course, you're going to get two scopes, which we see sometimes. Someone get a large objective scope for more stationary use, and if they're going to be lugging it around, they'll get a compact, or for, travel, get a 55 for when they're, traveling light, going abroad, something like that. But otherwise, yeah, that would be my advice to folks when I work all the consumer trade shows. If you're not going to carry one or the other, and you're trying to decide the smaller one's the right solution. So that's sort of a simplification, but it does seem to work.
yeah, absolutely. And the adapters, and the nice thing is with the full Promenade models, they're using the same eyepiece. And despite the little 55, obviously you can't take the eyepiece out. You can't use the PA7, but you can use the DA10 because the eye relief cap comes off, and that's a unique thing really for that tiny little scope. As you can put a DSLR on the end of it or a mirrorless camera, which is a real little plus point if you want to really go compact. So we've discussed the adapters previously. So yeah, the this I think over the years we've had so many adapters and so many rings, and but now I think with the Promenade scopes that we've got the most simplest, easiest system to explain now. If you want to go body only or if you want to go lens, these are the two adapters.
Yeah, when we swept through over the last, well, 5 years now, but 4 years in a row, bringing out a new model, the end result of our current Prominar scope line is very much the story of utilizing light components, and the quality of the components front to back on all of them is identical. As far as, we're using the same quality glass. There was huge variation in the lineup before that, with as many as 7 different spotting scopes. And now we've kind of reduced that down. In the Prominar in particular, we just have the four models. All have fluoride, all use the same quality glass and coatings front to back. And, if you look at the 99, 88, 66, literally from the twist collar back, the eyepiece, the prism box, and the focus system are identical parts. It's literally just the objective tube, which has changed on the larger models. So, um, yeah, it's allowed us to simplify our not only our scope lineups, but the adapters as well, which is really nice because now we've got 2 adapters that will work on all of them, with the exception of the PA7 will not mount to the body of the 55, which is a slightly shorter eyepiece as well, even though it is the same eyepiece, it's just a different mounting system.
And finally, on the equipment, yeah, the eyepiece is the 11WZ, which is the versatile 25 to 60 kit zoom lens. It's an ideal digiscoping choice. It's wide angle. You've got the flexibility of starting at 25 times up to 60, or obviously 30 to 70 if you're using the 99 because you get slightly more magnification. So it's an ideal for all-round digiscoping, and obviously our adapters are designed in a way that you can utilize the full zoom as well. And there's no vignetting if you're on full frame, APS-C or Micro Four Thirds. You will not get vignetting with, for example, the PA7. There's no vignetting at all. So it is a cross-platform system adapter. So that's a great all-rounder. The TE80XW, which is our ultra-wide fixed eyepiece, 35 or 40 if you're using the 99. Again, that is it's an incredible dual eyepiece for observation and digiscoping. Very flat field of view, sharp right across the edges. It's a huge wide angle field of view. So if you're using, I know we're talking about DSLRs here, but for smartphone, where you do get vignetting quite often, that's eliminated with this eyepiece. So it's a real amazing bit of kit.
Yeah, it's a great kit. A minor detail, but just again to eliminate some potential confusion for folks. In the marketplace, that eyepiece is now referred to as the TE11WZ2, Mark II. And the only difference between it and the first one, if you look right above the white slash on the left-hand lens there, you can see there's 2 different levels of engraving. When we brought out our 99 millimeter, which, as Rob just said, functions at 30 to 70 rather than 25 to 60, a second layer of engraving was put onto the power of magnification point on the eyepiece, and it was referred to as 11WZ2. So if you see that in the marketplace, don't think you're getting the wrong eyepiece or anything. I've had people say, "Oh, like, I'm looking for 11WZ. This is the two." It's just the same, just that it has the dual engraving for both the 99 millimeter magnification and the 66 and the 88 millimeter. So don't get confused by that.
A brief discussion on camera settings, and this people have their own preferences and they get used to using their own camera. One thing I would say is really, if you're going to do this, really get to know your camera first, know all the settings, and then it'll make your life a lot easier when you're out digiscoping. When you're combining the two technologies, if you know your camera at the back of your hand, it's going to make your life a lot easier. But from my perspective and the perspective of a lot of the ambassadors that I spend time with, uh, we tend to stick the camera into aperture priority mode. That's seems to be the base to start with, and then that gives you some flexibility to increase the ISO and the shutter speeds and that kind of thing. If you're using body only, the body only method, because there's no lens, there's no electronics talking to the camera from the scope, it'll usually just show up as f naught because there's no reading there. Um, so what you have to do from there, you use the other settings in the camera to control your shutter speed. So if you're an aperture priority, you can then, if you want, if, say you're getting a shutter speed of a hundredth of a second, if the conditions are not so bright, hundredth of a second, you really need to up that because if you're the minimum 1,000 millimeter, you're going to get motion blur. No matter how stable the setup is, the chances are you're going to introduce some motion blur. So you increase the ISO within the camera, and that will give you a faster shutter speed. And as you increase the ISO, you'll see the shutter speed increasing. If the weather changes, if the cloud shifts across the sun, you'll suddenly see a huge leap in your shutter speed. So it's all dependent on the conditions and the light. But we always recommend aperture priority is the most simple place to start. If you're using the camera attached to the body, then we kind of recommend that you use the widest, fastest aperture that the lens will give you. You don't want to be reducing light from the scope, the lens. If you have the lens on something like f8, you're reducing the aperture so the hole becomes small in the lens, so you're blocking light from the scope. So if it's an f1.8 lens, put it at f1.8, and then you're getting maximum light through the system. And then you can adjust your exposure. You can use the exposure compensation then. So if you're photographing maybe a gull, which is white, a lot of white and bright, if it's too bright because you don't want to overexpose, just take the exposure down on the exposure compensation then. And then what the camera will do, it quicken the shutter speed a little bit to adjust to that setting. So it's only a few things. There's only three or four things within the camera that once you know how to use them, then you can really control the digiscoping method.
Yeah, exposure compensation is a huge one. And, when I even do the workshops on the phones, it's the same exact thing. People don't realize that they can lock that and then adjust the exposure. Like you say, if it's a really white bird against a dark background, you're going to need to make it darker. And conversely, if there's a bird silhouetted against a bright sky, you're going to need to make it brighter so that the bird gets better exposed, even understanding that the background's going to be negatively affected. The sky may turn from blue to white, but you want that your subject to have the proper lighting on it. So, yep, that's about it. And again, the lens system, once again, beyond having the full functionality of the camera, now you can also kind of cheat your light, as Rob was alluding to, by putting the lens at max aperture, allowing for quicker shutter speeds, even though your true aperture, again, is not that large based on the light coming out of the spotting scope, but it does give you more versatility and more ability to play with different shutter speeds that you don't have otherwise.
Yeah, one thing about the exposure compensation, which we've all learned when we're photographing birds, very often if it's a bird in a tree, you might the bird is only a small part of the background, but if you overexpose the details, even if you shoot in RAW, which is capturing the most detail in the pixels that you possibly can, even if you overexpose it, if there's no detail in the wides, there isn't really any software that can bring it back. Whereas if you've perfectly balanced for the whites and you can see the feather detail, because there's always detail within the whites, so you can see that detail. The background may look a little bit darker, but even if you've shot in JPEG, you'll be able to bring back in software. You can adjust the photo and get a more even balance. But yeah, don't overexpose. And I think wildlife photography is one of the key thing, one of the way you'll see that the most with that kind of thing, where something small in a frame maybe, because it's not, I think with digiscoping, it doesn't all have to just to be about the detail. You can still be very artistic with it. You don't have to have this a real close up of the bird. You can put it, set the scene. Where the layout of the third rule, the golden third rule, where the bird's sitting to the left of the image or to the right of the image. You can create stunning images.
Yeah, it's a great tool. It's a great kit. It's great glass and fluoride, which is fluoride crystal rather than glass in our lens, which is something that's unique to the Kowa brand right now. Anyway, um, it's wonderful. Hopefully, this video is going to help demystify some of the questions that people have on a regular basis about how should I go about this and get you started. Um, and then, we do have, gosh, how many digiscoping videos do you think we have on
Oh,
our YouTube page now? It's dozens, isn't it? Now,
yeah.
there's no shortage of additional materials as far as field craft and other things. But we wanted to address this one in particular to help people a lot with just the coupling, literally getting the kit built, and what it is you need to get started, and then the rest of it just comes from practice and play in the field, really.
Few useful techniques. I mean, it's yeah, the manual. It's a manual system, and I like it because with the Digiscope, and I always feel like you've got some ownership of the image. I mean, with modern technology, with these lenses and cameras, their autofocus systems are blisteringly fast. I I think anyone can use this equipment. So I think with Digiscoping, it's a manual process, and I really feel like you own the image and you've achieved something because with manual focus, you're in control of the image. Um, it's your you've fine-tuned your skills, your crafts, and you've got used to manually focusing. That's digiscoping. It's challenging because the subject's not going to sit there unless it's perched and very happy and just sitting there. You've got to have fast reactions. You've got to manually focus the scope, and you've got to keep checking. So I think you can when you look back at your images and you see how good they are, you can have some you should be really proud about Digiscope's images. So remember, it's a manual focus on the scope um, rather than autofocus. So you do have to really check your focus, and that's where the dual focus on the scope comes in with that fingertip control. So always think manual focus and readjust, fine tune continuously. So that's what Paul Hackett, one of our big digiscopers, that's one of his main messages is always keep checking your focus and readjusting. Um, don't just assume if one shot's in focus, then that the next one's going to be. Use the functions of your camera. So focus peaking, which is uh, it's a great feature for us digiscopers that are having to manual focus, and the majority of the mirrorless cameras offer focus peaking, and it's a visual representation. When the sensor detects the highest level of contrast, the sharpest image, it will put a halo around the subject, which is in focus. So it's an immediate reference to your eye that right, I'm in focus. So if you've got that feature, set it up and use it. It's a real powerful visual aid for the manual focus process.
Yeah, that's a really big one. Especially, as we age, I got my progressives here, and that changes every year. So you've got also the diopter um, on your viewfinder on the camera. If that's off, what may look like in focus to you may not actually be to the camera. So that's where the focus peaking is really good too, because
Yeah.
if your eyes aren't up to the task, perhaps, the camera still gets it. So that's a huge advantage on the camera systems that, you know, um, we don't have as much of control of, on the phones.
Yeah. It's a good point actually because when you are digiscoping and doing any kind of photography outside, obviously with screens, if it's a bright day, it can be very difficult to see the back of an LED screen. So that's one thing I do like about the DSLR is you can look through the viewfinder and it's a nice high contrast image that you can put your eye to. But yeah, the diopter adjustment on the viewfinder is very important. So I always double check I've got what I tend to do is just literally make sure all the characters, all the display is crystal sharp. The screen, the digital details on the screen is crystal sharp, and then I know it's set to my eye. And then the other thing I use a lot on my my camera is the ability to check the focus on manual. So you can set it up in your settings that if you're on manual focus, if you half press the shutter, it will. You can set it up to manually crop in to give you a brief look to check that the image is in focus. So it'll crop in, go very close, and then you can tweak your scope focusing, or you can set it up on a function button that you hit, and it will zoom right in very close into the image. You can double check your focus, click it again, and it goes back to what you're going to capture for the final image. So that's a nice, useful thing. Because sometimes even the focus peaking may slightly be off if it's not so contrasty. Um,
Yeah, that's that's the advantage of these more complex camera systems. And again, going back to why it's great to have that lens included because the camera does so much, and you've paid more for those features. Why not utilize them to their fullest to give you the best advantage and best chance of getting really great images or video. I mean, we haven't talked about video, but it's the same.
we've mentioned the exposure thing about like goals, egrets. Yeah, so really use that exposure compensation and remember whites. If you can't, if it's blown out, if you can't see the detail, you won't get it back. So just always be mindful of that. We've already said about know your camera inside out is going to help you out in the field. Know all the aids that the camera has got, and yeah, practice makes perfect. It's a manual process. Once you get your eye, once you get your technique, it becomes easier like anything else. And if you've got a garden, if you've got some green space outside, then use these. That's how I started. Just shooting, photographing the bird feeders in the garden. It really
Mhm.
helps just to get your eye in and get your skills together.
Yeah, and of course, the more you do, the more effective you get, the quicker you get your ability to get on your subject quickly. That's something that just gets easier and easier as you continue to develop your skills. So, yeah, practice. But hopefully, by helping people set things up and getting their gear square first, we can make the process more enjoyable for you so you don't get frustrated and will practice more and you get better results in the end.
A few little hints and tips, nothing crazy here, just some obvious ones really. The remote shutter release, we talked about that mirror slap, which that anything that's the more you magnify something, the more risk of motion blur. Any effects are magnified, so a small vibration becomes a big vibration the more that you magnify. So if your camera can be linked up to a remote shutter cable release, just use one. You don't have to press the buttons on the camera. You can just fire away, and anything you can do to avoid shake will help.
Yeah.
Stable tripod and fluid video head. Yes, I mean anything when you're digiscoping, you'll really find if when you start going above 1,000 millimeter and into two and a half thousand mil, just keeping on the subject or finding the subject is can become tricky. If your tripod has got some play in it, it can be very frustrating, and you'll miss
Yeah.
shots.
Yeah,
That's
your gear, your kit is only going to be as effective as the weakest link in the system. Be it your tripod, your head, whatever. And to that point, I was talking about using the smaller objective scopes. With my back, sometimes I just will often carry a really lightweight tripod with one of the compact, a 66 millimeter scope, one or the other very often, just because it's like I'm carrying it all day. But I understand that I'm bringing limitations with that. The more lightweight tripod's going to have more motion and more shake, more vibration in it. So, you just have to compensate and again, get the best quality you can with the gear you're using. It's not a right or wrong, but there are compromises in all of this. And again, we've alluded to it, but it's the same in all optics. As we increase magnification, your the width of what you're viewing side to side, of course, gets narrower because you're taking the subject and blowing it up more in that frame with more magnification. But that also increases your shake, and that becomes an issue even in binoculars. When people want to use a 10 or a 12 power binocular, sometimes, depending on how much vibration you have in your personal system, how able you are to hold those still, you may find that you can resolve detail better at lower power. And that's another thing with this system too that lends itself to what we're talking about here. Another trick can be if you can't get that enough shutter speed with the available light, well, you can maybe reduce that uh, the zoom, and go back to a smaller subject, and then you can crop it in later if you can get it crisp and still. So that's again like sort of a field craft thing you can that is related to that.
Troubleshooting blurry images. What I found over the years of helping people and inquiries on our website, if somebody contacts us and said they're digiscoping with a DSLR or mirrorless, that I can't get a sharp image. More often than not, is that shutter speed. It's a big thing. There's a typical example here of your images may just be slightly off focus, even though they've looked pin sharp through the viewfinder. What you'll usually find is motion blur, and especially if you're doing body only, you'll be surprised that you know just how much of a shutter speed you do really need to freeze frame something to 1,000 mil. Really, I would probably say you could ideally do with getting on for 1,000th of a shutter speed. Really, I mean, depending on how stable you set up and tripod is, you probably get away with 500. But always check your shutter speed. If you're getting motion blur, check look at the data on the picture. You can check the exif data and look at what the shutter speed was, and more often than not, it could be 1/10 of a second, but it is not going to capture that freeze frame moment at that high magnification.
Yeah.
So just pump up that ISO settings and really make sure you're getting a fast shutter speed. Even if your tripod's you set up as tripod mounted, it makes no difference because you're still going to get vibration.
There's always going to be some level of movement. And as you said, as your magnification goes up, this much movement may not be noticeable to 8 power magnification, but when you get to this, 25 to 60 power magnification, that movement of your system is going to be increased that many times.
Whatever you can do to limit the vibration is going to help as well, like we've just discussed with the remote shutters and that kind of thing. You can use a self timer, but obviously you you need a very well behaved subject if you're going to use a self timer and not touch the setup. Obviously, it would suit uh, a subject that's perched and is not moving anywhere. But if you're trying to photograph warblers or something like that, then a self timer is not going to work. So it all depends on the situation, really.
Sure. And I mean, get off the rails a little bit if we're going to talk a little bit of field craft. Something I do with the phones all the time, and I know that the modern cameras are getting more and more of this technology as well. You spoke about warblers. When I'm shooting small birds like that are just constantly bouncing around and flitting, I shoot in video. And I'll shoot at a very high rate of video and then peel a frame out of there so that I can be following around. And most of it may be just absolutely blurry, blocked, leaves in front. But for, 2 seconds, it's hopping up that branch,
Yeah,
comes into a window between, the leaves and the foliage, and I get a shot of the bird that's, near full frame.
yeah.
I always keep the light to my back, whenever possible. And so a lot of my images, I show a lot of them are video stills, to be quite honest. I know a lot of these modern cameras have um, almost default anymore, but I think there's settings where they can take like a certain like a 3 to 5 second video clip along with the still that you're shooting, correct?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And some like I was out with some of our ambassadors recently. They were shooting with some Panasonic gear and filming 8K. So you imagine, that's a big megapixel still image from every frame. So that
Yeah.
would work really well.
Yeah, that's been a game changer. Some of the new technologies in the cameras, which are allowing us to do things that we couldn't have done 5, 10 years ago.
And manual focus, just always check that focus in. It is critical. The depth of field is shallow, so any age you can use on the camera, the focus peaking, zooming in onto the image, just keep tweaking that focus, and that's very often will solve your blurry image issue.
Yeah, and I think, like I said, there's a great repository um, of information already on our YouTube channel. It's Kowa Sporting Optics. You go down to YouTube and just search for the user Kowa Sporting Optics, and go to our page, and you can review all of our videos. There's a lot of product videos that show physically how to hook some of these things up, but maybe not to the detail we went in here with, the third party, like the T2 ring and the thread ring adapters. I think that's something that was kind of an understood in the past. So hopefully that'll help folks get set up properly. But beyond those, Paul, Simon Brumby, and we're going to see more from Justin Carr, who just has joined us, a very skilled digiscoper as well. Um, on more fieldcraft techniques. So we do have a lot of that online already. Again, the purpose of this one was more, I think, suited just to ensure that people can get set up and get started. So hopefully, this video will help a lot. And Rob, thanks for getting with me on this and help me, address this subject about, getting your kit hooked up properly so that you can begin Digiscoping, because it's a lot of fun when you get out there. You're going to really enjoy it once you start getting decent results, especially.